Welcome to this episode of Unraveling Adoption, an intentional space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I am Beth Syverson, an adoptive mom of a creative and insightful 20-year-old son, Joe, who is trying really hard to launch as an adult. I'm walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing. I'm also a certified coach, helping primarily adoptive parents. Joe and I are committed to helping anyone touched by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. In today's episode, our guest will be answering the question, how can people with adoption trauma recover from addiction? Our guest is David Bohl, a relinquishee who has struggled and recovered from addiction. He has done a deep dive into the intersection between addiction and adoption. He's received a pile of credentials for helping people struggling with addiction, including from the Hazelton Betty Ford Graduate School of Addiction Studies. He's served on the board of several prominent addiction and adoption organizations, and he's written both a memoir called Parallel Universes and a nonfiction book called Relinquishment and Addiction, What Trauma Has to Do with It. So let's learn from David's rich experience in both the adoption and the addiction worlds. And welcome to Unraveling Adoption, David.
Thank you, Beth. It's my pleasure being here.
I'm looking forward to this. And I know your words will help lots and lots of people, because lots of people are either struggling with addiction themselves or know somebody who is. So,
well, isn't that the truth?
Super important topic.
And nothing is more important at this time of the year as people start to re-examine their relationships with behaviors, substances, etc. So thanks for the opportunity.
All of it. Yeah, right at the new year. Definitely. Well, I recently heard you giving a workshop at the Celia Center's wonderful online conference, and I was so impressed with your balanced approach to helping people recover from addiction. It seems like you want to destigmatize addiction and really help people recover. Where did that come from? Where did that passion for helping others come from for you?
Boy, it's a really long story, but I'm going to make it really short, right? It came from my desire not to see others suffer to the degree that I did. Yeah. I mean, I can tell you right now, I think I'm on the other side of it. I'm feeling really good. I'm 63 years old. I've done a lot of work, and I think it's paid off, but it wasn't easy to do during that. And there was really no guide. There was no one specifically helping me to get through the issues, to do the work, to regain new perspectives that were healthier. And I think that's why it's become so very important to me. It's not just about affirming individuals and making it a safe space for them to be able to do this work, but also helping them to examine some perspectives that might not be healthy for them anymore.
Yeah. Now, can you give us a real quick overview of your adoption story and also when you started grabbing onto substances?
Sure. Well, my adoption story is that I was relinquished at birth and adopted by a family 7 days later. About 14 months after that, it became legal. I describe myself as you did earlier, as a relinquishee and an adoptee, because I've recognized throughout this work that they represent two distinct and separate experiences that are playing out over the course of my lifetime. So relinquishment has some effects on me, and it affected me with regard to my unhealthy relationship with substances and other behaviors. And being adopted into a family that was loving and did everything they can, but that I struggled to attach to, also represented problems later on. The underlying theme in all of that, of course, and we can get back to this when we get back to the underlying question that you asked about, how do people heal from this experience, right? The underlying in all of this is that these are trust issues, right? We don't trust ourselves, we don't trust others, and when we're told what the solution is, we can't trust a higher power, we can't trust a treatment program, we can't trust anything, right? So we have to experience things for ourselves, and we have to live them, and we have to feel attached to them. And that's ultimately the problem of being both relinquished and adopted. So I grew up in a great home. I was given every advantage. My parents loved me. They did exactly what the social workers told them, and that was pretend he's your own and don't make a big deal of it. And that's exactly what they did. And they felt no reason over a lifetime to go back and re-examine that. They thought they were doing exactly what happened.
Sure.
And as we know today, that's not necessarily a good approach, right? We are all individuals. We all have different perceptions of what's going on. We need the safety and the ability to communicate with others, as to ask questions to find out what's going on and to check ourselves as to what we think reality is and what it really isn't. And ultimately, that's what happened to me. I grew up in a place where I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel attached. I didn't feel like anyone had my back. However, I stumbled upon alcohol at age 12, and it became the magic elixir. That became a solution to a problem I couldn't even quantify, that I couldn't even describe in words. And all of a sudden, I felt okay about myself intermittently, not all the time, but intermittently started to feel good. It quieted my mind, but it also connected me to a group of people who I felt was doing something together. We had found a common solution to life's troubles together. We were doing it together, and that made us special, and that made me feel connected. And that was the real first attachment that I had.
Yeah.
Of course, as we know with alcohol or any drugs or any other addictive behaviors, over time, that solution becomes a problem. And ultimately, as I employed that solution as a coping mechanism to life's problems repeatedly, instead of learning healthy coping mechanisms to solve life problems, the physiological nature of the alcohol addiction took over, as well as the psychological addiction, right? I was numbing myself instead of processing life and delving into life. And that played out over a long period of time. It didn't happen overnight. It took me from age 12 to age 45 before I said I've had enough alcohol.
Wow.
Of course, there was some nicotine in there as well. And
Sure.
I've learned in retrospect, nicotine was much harder to quit than alcohol was, because it has that dual effect. It's almost like a speedball, right? You get that rush and then you get the relaxation. And I had to go through that as well. And I've had some struggles with eating as well. And I'm continuing to work through all of those things. But that ultimately is a really long story made short. So when I finally woke up one day, and there were a series of events that led up to it. One of them was having children of my own. One of them was having a spouse who said, yeah, okay, David, you might not want any of this information, but you owe it to your children. Let's go get that information. Yes. It was the result of having 2 grand mal seizures that never went diagnosed. They may have been as a result of alcoholism. I don't know.
Really?
But the bonus in all of that was that the neurologist who treated me said, we need to diagnose this. And to diagnose this, you need to find out about your family. I know this is scary for you, David. We'll hold your hand. We're going to help you through it. And he and his staff took me through the process of petitioning the state of Wisconsin, getting non-identifying information. And that led to a whole bunch of other revelations that I've come across after working towards them over the years.
Wow.
So it was miraculous that happened. And I don't use that term lightly. It was really a series of events that led me on my way. I survived the addiction. I didn't kill myself, although I came pretty darn close. Oof. And I was able to see a new perspective. Hey, maybe my perspective growing up wasn't really healthy. Maybe, I was unsafe, but maybe there are places I can go to find that safety. Maybe I can go back and start creating some healthy coping mechanisms to deal with life where I didn't have them before. And maybe I can go back and repair relationships or repair structures and fractures that might have occurred along the way. And all of that has occurred. I continue to do that. And ultimately, the story, Beth, is we talk about recovery. Medical professionals talk about things going into remission. I talk about expansion, right? What this has allowed me to do is it allowed me to expand my identity from a scared, frightened, disconnected young person to someone who, yes, of course, has to be careful of substances and other behaviors, and yes, has some ongoing processing that he needs to do relative to some experience he's had throughout his life, particularly as it related to his relinquishment and adoption. But I'm so much more than that. And I've been able to broaden my identity development or identity formation. Is such a large topic in our community, but that's been underlying my recovery throughout.
Yes. Your story is really, really powerful. And I bet a lot of people can really relate to it, even if it's just food addiction or addiction to our stupid phones that keep us numbed out and detached. And
absolutely.
I just really, I'm an adoptive mom, and I'll never truly understand what it feels like, but I really want to understand. And I have a lot of empathy for that feeling disconnected. And it started so young, probably in utero for many adopted people, relinquished people. And it's just so tough to deal with that. It's so ingrained.
It is.
It's not like you had some sort of accident and lost a leg or something when you're 25.
Right.
When that happens, it's also tragic, but you had something before that.
Exactly.
But for relinquishees, especially infants like you have nothing before that you can even grab onto. So, the depth of the pain is overwhelming, I bet.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, addiction and behavioral issues are simply problems to be solved, right? We've had a society that sometimes co-opted the language of those things. So there are lots of solutions out there depending on how you look at the problem, right? The 12-step groups, I'm not disparaging anyway, right? I got sober in 12-step groups. Lots of people benefit from them, not just those who suffer from the addictions, but those who are exposed to it.
Yeah, Al-Anon.
And as a result have some relationship fractures that occur, right? All of that is great, but they speak their own language. What I think you do very particularly carefully, and what I work really hard to do, is use everyday language when I describe these things, right? I could have told my story from a 12-step perspective to say I had no connection with a higher power. I didn't know, right? There are any number of things, but that's not really what happened. I had no connection to human beings. I found something that worked, and I used it till it really hurt me. And that ultimately is the language I think that is most helpful to people who are learning about this or trying to figure this out. Coming out of the fog is a term that's used in our community. I understand where that term comes from. It makes a lot of sense to people. sadly, I work with a lot of people who feel shame by it. They think, well, oh my goodness, if I was in the fog, it was my fault I was in the fog. And it just layers shame on it. But by using common language, I think that's how we help people. And that's how we guide them to solutions that are remarkable, right? And addiction is just a problem to be solved. Let's talk about the problem. Let's talk about what solutions are available. And let's get you to them, right?
Yeah. It's not a character flaw or a decision you made or something like that. It's the problem, just like people have all sorts of problems that they go get help for all over the place and are not stigmatized the way addiction sometimes is.
Absolutely. And part of that language, of course, the medical language and the recovery language is particularly difficult for individuals in our community. There is a woman that I have had the pleasure of co-authoring a book called Relinquishment and Addiction with. Her name is Dr. Jamie Marich. Dr. Jamie Marich has written about 13 books on trauma to date. And she wrote a book called Trauma in the 12 Steps some years ago where she talked about, and I don't want to tell her story, but she's ultimately not just a PhD clinician. She's also in recovery herself from any number of maladies and in 12-step recovery nonetheless. And she struggled with that trust factor in some of the language in those 12-step programs. And she wrote a book to purposely and specifically address those difficulties within the community. So it's probably not surprising to hear that people have trouble. People in our community have trouble by being told to sit down and shut up or take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth. Some of that language is so judgmental. It reminds them of times early in their life where they felt like they were alone and isolated and that something was wrong with them, right? So she's done a wonderful job of helping people assimilate into those programs using a more accepting language. But that's something that ultimately goes back to your question. What do we need to do? We need to build trust, right? We need to build trust. We have been really fortunate over the last few years. Our community has become really robust. I mean, things like the work that you do, not just for individuals, but families and others. It's amazing how far we've come so far, yet sometimes we're missing the mark. The assumption becomes, if I just find a safe place and if I just connect, right? If I get validated with other people, I'm instantly healed. And I would say, you know what? There's something to that. It is important to find safe communities, right? Whether that be a parent-only community, adoptee-only community, whatever that is, there is value in that. And getting validated is really important because it not only allows you to look at different perspectives, but it allows you to get to know yourself better.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's not the solution. That is the very minimum that you need to start healing.
It's a good start.
Once you find those things, then we need to take action. Then we need to examine our perceptions. Then we need to see what worked and what doesn't work anymore. Then we need to eliminate things from our life that aren't working and add things that are going to enhance our ability to feel good about ourselves, our others, and our place in the world. So we need to really be careful about that discussion. But it's a robust community. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
We just want to make sure that we help people rather than intimidating them. Or, as I said at the start of the discussion, fostering that distrust of others, right? So here's someone else trying to sell me their perspective. That sounds really forceful to me. That sounds really religious to me, or whatever the case may be. We need to be careful about that. Absolutely.
So you're saying that the connection in adoption spaces is important, but that is not going to heal your addiction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a good place to start.
There's more of the work that needs to be done, right?
Yeah. It's really deep personal work.
You need that ability to stabilize, right?
Yeah.
So the ultimate question is how do we get sober? Well, we have to stabilize it, right? We can't continue to use chemicals or behaviors in addictive ways, i.e. unhealthy ways, and expect to get clear about our relationship with them and our relationship with ourselves and everything in the world. Yeah. We need to somehow stop piling on to that dilemma, or we need to stop feeding the misperception that we're unwhole or that we need something more or that we need to self-medicate, right? We need to stabilize the situation. And part of that can be going into these spaces that are allowing us to relate to others, to be validated by others, to find a safe place. Absolutely important. And addiction treatment is not a lot different. They should exist the same way. However, a couple things that we need to think in addition to that. There are a lot of us who enter those spaces with lots of trauma and lots of drama in our lives. So we're going to find others with that there too, right? We're going to find others with solutions, but there's a lot going on there. And if we haven't had trauma-informed or adoption-competent experiences or training, that could be a trigger and that could set us way back. It's not unusual for adoptees or even parents to go into a space, be very enthusiastic, and all of a sudden think, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed. I'm going to step away. And then they step away for years because they can't come back into the pain.
Yeah.
Or they haven't been led through it, right? Wait a minute. That was supposed to be a safe place. What happened? Well, we need to work through that. So we stabilize. We treat the addiction concurrently, right? As though it's, Paul Sunderland has said, we treat it concurrently as though it's a co-occurring disorder with the relinquishment trauma that might have existed, whether that be from a parent perspective or a child perspective. And then we try to integrate that experience going forward. Yeah. That's where the healing comes from. So yes, by all means, find a safe place. Yes, by all means, get validated. Yes, read lots of stories, listen to podcasts, right? Do all of that to help you to better understand who you are, and then find an accountability partner to check that with, whether that's a program or a therapist or a coach or a consultant. Find someone whose interest is in you seeing reality rather than in you being happy or blowing smoke up your backside. That's the whole key. And I'm oversimplifying it. Sure. I understand human beings are complex. Dilemmas are complex. Emotions hold huge sway over us at certain times in our lives. It's not that simple. However, that is the structure for all growth and expansion going forward.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. It sounds really like a great recipe. And you mentioned that Paul Sunderland, he has that wonderful video called
Adoption Remembered, Not Recalled.
I will put the link to it in the notes. It's an extremely well done speech, basically, about addiction and adoption. It's brilliant. And I connected with a lot of that. And do you want to talk about the group that you run with Celia Center regarding adoption and addiction?
Certainly. Every other Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. And of course, around the world, it's not local to the U.S. We get visitors from other English-speaking areas of the world. We run an addiction and adoption Constellation support group. All members of the Constellation are welcome because we understand that when we are exposed to addiction, whether we experience it ourselves or we see it in a loved one, or it somehow is in the workplace, this affects us in significant ways going forward. So we've invited the Constellation to come in. We meet for an hour and a half every other Tuesday. We do exactly what you say. We try to create a safe place. We validate experiences, but we're not trying to compete with other support groups or other recovery groups out there. We're not trying to replicate what others have done. This is a facilitated group. So I am a trained and licensed facilitator, right, in terms of mental health, and I facilitate that group, and we have a very robust discussion of what's going on. We have core people who have been in it since the beginning. We've been at it for just over 3 years now. Wow. And we have people who come each and every day. I'm heartened by all of the discussions, but I have to confess, I'm really heartened when some individual who's in for example, a residential treatment facility who had an adoption experience is calling in while they're still in treatment. I'm so heartened by that. I think, oh my gosh, if I had been able to try to draw that parallel, to see that intersection between my adoption experience and addiction that early on, it would have saved me immense work and immense pain. So it's very heartening, the types of individuals that come into these spaces. And like any other space, people are not necessarily there every time. They come when they have problems. They come when they're looking for solutions, or they come when they are seeking connection. Right? Sure. We were fortunate to have a group on Tuesday, December 26th this year, which happened to coincide with the holidays. Can be a very isolating and lonely time for people in our adoption constellation in our community.
Yes.
And it was very well received and very well attended.
I bet necessary. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm honored to facilitate that group at the Celia Center. It's work worth doing. And it's not just a matter of supporting the individual as a group. It's also about doing what you do, raising awareness, providing psychoeducation, letting people know that there are resources that didn't exist even a few short years ago.
Yep. It's amazing the last few years because of COVID, basically. There's so much available now on Zoom. People really have no excuse for feeling isolated except for their own mental health, maybe. But
absolutely,
just there's so many ways to get involved. So, I'll put the community calendar in the notes.
Great.
I list a billion support groups for everybody in the Adoption Constellation.
That is such a wonderful resource that you've assembled. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I try to keep it up. And if anybody sees that I don't have something in there, just send me a note, or there's a little form on the website. You can add your own events. So I think that's so important to have places where you can go. Do you know any numbers as far as how many people who are adopted struggle with addiction?
Boy, there are different studies, right? When we talk about actual numbers, it's very difficult to say because people are treated at different parts of the continuum. However, the lowest numbers I've ever seen is that we are 1.5 times more susceptible to addiction than the general public, which means that if the general public is 10 to 15%, right, we are somewhere in the 15 to 22.5% range. If one could come extrapolate those numbers out, which is a huge percentage, absolutely.
Yes.
I've heard numbers bigger than that, and I don't want to be dramatic, but we're going to continue to do ongoing research. I think one of the problems we have in our space is that although we've done a really great job highlighting the voices of lived experience over the years, we've been very protective of our communities, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, because of that protection. Number two, because we're funded in different ways. We're not bringing experts into our community who can shed light from their experiences with other populations on what we're doing. And it's a difficult place to be, yet it needs to be done. We need to do that research. We need people with experiences with people with developmental trauma, maybe not adoption trauma, but developmental trauma, to come in and tell us what they're learning and what they know. And I think we're doing that by having these discussions, but I can't stress that enough, right? Lived experience is great. It's wonderfully empowering to our whole community. Let's attract the experts at the same time.
Yeah, it's all necessary, very much so. And if you had an adopted person standing in front of you that has no idea where to go and they want to get out of addiction's grasp, what would be your first thing you would tell them to do?
Boy, that's a great question. I love it. And it reminds me how I got started in this business. Just a brief anecdote. I was trained to become a life coach. I was coaching individuals, mostly executives in the business world, as to not only how to do better in their profession, but how to have more fun and health in their private life. And I didn't want that to have anything to do with my own program of staying healthy and recovery until I actually had an opportunity to do that. I went to a football game. My son played college football out east. The guy who ran the local treatment center was there. He asked me to speak at his treatment facility. And I said, of course, I'd never turned down a speaking opportunity. I said, what do you want me to talk about? Is it this an experience, strength, and hope thing, like the structure of the 12-step fellowships? He said, no, I want you to tell these individuals what they can do starting the second they meet you to turn their lives around. And I thought, wow, what an amazing challenge. And I went and I took him up on his challenge. A week later, I was at his treatment facility talking to a group of 90 individuals, incarcerated individuals who were offered treatment as an alternative to incarceration, who came from the boroughs of New York. And it not only went well, but this gentleman who owned the treatment facility took me out to dinner afterwards, and he said, you missed your calling if you don't do this. And that was the first time I realized I could incorporate my lived experience and develop it further through gaining expertise about the subject matter. So ultimately, the question is find someone and somewhere to trust, and let's get clear. Let's get clear on what's working in your life today and what's not working in your life today. Plain and simple. I don't need to use terminology that says you need to stop every chemical right now and you need to stop for the rest of your life. That's not my job to say. My job is to find out, are you happy? Are you not happy? What can we focus on? Where should we be diverting our energy as opposed to using it to struggle or to survive or to self-medicate or to connect, right? What can we be doing in a healthy way to get you further on down the road? So let's not only set up the goals, let's talk about what outcomes look like. And then we talk about that. What would your life look like if these problems didn't exist, if these obstacles and these challenges were not in your life? Great. Now that we know that, I have some ideas on resources, right? I'm not only a coach, but I put on my consultant hat and I say, well, I have some ideas as to where we can go with this. There are support groups out there I'd like you to dabble in. There are a couple of readings that might be helpful to you. I'd like you to talk to Beth or have your family talk to Beth. Whatever the case is, there are lots of resources to bear upon that problem. But until we get clear that there's a problem that can be overcome. And of course, part of this is motivational enhancement, helping individuals to get motivated to do some really hard work, to do an examination of their lives, which is not easy to do. Most people can't do it, whether you have an addiction or not.
Yeah, it's hard.
Most people are not very good at it and they struggle with it.
It's really tough. Yeah.
So we go through that process. And of course, it takes a lot of effort on my part building trust, because I can't expect people to jump on a Zoom call and tell me their life stories. They need to understand that I am trustworthy, that I have had experiences similar to theirs, and that there is hope that things can get better and get better quickly. So that's how we approach that.
Totally get it. It is hard work, but if you find people that you can really trust and engage with, it makes it so much easier. Nobody has to walk this path alone, for sure.
Absolutely.
And David, if people wanted to call you and get a hold of you to hire you as a coach, recovery coach, is that what you call yourself?
Yes, I would call myself a recovery consultant and coach. Absolutely. Or a recovery manager is another term for it, certainly. Okay, nice. They can find me at my webpage. My business is called Beacon Confidential. It's beaconconfidential.com on the web. My phone number is there. You can reach out to me. There's a bot that you can chat with me. There's all kinds of ways to find me. Or you can just Google my name with the middle initial B, David B. Bohl. I've done some writing. I've done some speaking. There are some things out there that may be of benefit to you. Definitely.
Yeah, it's not hard to find you on the web. You have a slightly unusual name, which is nice because then you can find your stuff very easily. And dig around and find David or find somebody.
Absolutely.
There are lots of people, and David's really great in this space in the adoption world. I see you up there all the time, bringing resources to people and making yourself available. So call David or find somebody and get help, because you are worth it, and everybody can find what works for them, because we all are working hard trying to find our answers. So reach out and find what works for you.
Well said. There are lots of resources. There are people to trust. There are people with this experience, and they're right around the corner.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You don't need to suffer any longer. Let's please get you to someone who can help.
Yes, there's help out there. Well, thank you for coming on and talking about this very, very important topic. I wish you well. And I think I'll be seeing you in Denver in April for the Untangling Our Roots Summit.
Absolutely. I look forward to that. Mm-hmm.
I met you there last year at the one in Louisville. So looking forward to that.
Absolutely.
I'll put a link to that if anyone wants to sign up for that. I'm super looking forward to that. And
Great.
Anything else that you wanted to mention before I wrap up?
Yes. At the beginning of the year, people tend to make proclamations. They look back on the year and they tend to look at the things that didn't work so well as opposed to the things that worked really well. And they put themselves under an immense amount of pressure to be perfect and to be perfect today. Please be gentle with yourselves. Give yourself a break. Change can happen incrementally, and oftentimes it's better that it does. We've heard the cliche, trust the process. Oftentimes the process is the most important thing. When we talk about adoptee groups, it's not unusual for me to hear people say, wait a minute, David, you're suggesting that the solution is to go into a group of people that I don't trust in the first place? Do you understand where I'm coming from with this? Well, wait a minute. Just being open to that process is movement. It's significant expansion. It begins the healing process. So be gentle, please.
Yep. A little bit at a time. Yeah, for sure. A lot of self-compassion there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again for joining us, and reach out to David. Find Unraveling Adoption on unravelingadoption.com. If you're an adoptive parent, I want to invite you to a couple of coaching groups I have coming up. They're starting this week, the 22nd and the 24th of January, 2024. But it's not too late for you to hop on in. There are 3 groups. One is for parents of teens and young adults who are struggling with addiction, apropos to today's talk. And I have another one for adoptive parents of kids who are 6 to 12 years old called Nurturing Identity. And the third one is for parents of kids 0 to 5 or hopeful adoptive parents. And that one's called Making Connections. These will be small groups of 3 to 6 parents in a semi-structured coaching session. It will last 6 one-hour sessions together. If you're interested, go to unravelingadoption.com/coaching or email me at beth@unravelingadoption.com and I'll send you some more information. And if you're listening to this and it's way past the time that we started this coaching group, reach out to me and I might have other coaching groups by the time you're listening to this. And I also always offer individual coaching for adoptive parents. So reach out anytime. Thank you all for listening and taking part in this podcast. Please share this episode with anyone you think might be struggling with addiction, or maybe has a child or loved one struggling with addiction. This is such an important topic, and David is such a wise mentor for all of us. So thank you again for listening. David and I want you all to stay safe.